So good morning. We're learning as this chus for Shlema for Ilana Chaya Baserach and for Meir ben Cyril Peril. We are on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We had brought on in the previous Gemara the machlokes between. We first brought Rabbi Shmuel Sita that he says that prior to the Yidden coming into Eretz Yisrael, they were only able to eat meat that was brought as a carbon. They would bring a shlamim, and the leftover food was a shlamim. Like the Gemara explained, it said that it's because the reason is because they had the Mishkan right there. There's no need to do shchitas chullin, to do just shechta, regular animal. They would always bring it as a carbon. But when they came to Eretz Yisrael, then it switched, and they were living far away from the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore there was a heter to shecht animals on their own without bringing it as a carbon, and that's what our Mishnah was telling us, that even after the Gidden left Eretz Yisrael, that still remains in place. They don't have to bring a carbon. They could still do shchitas chulin. That was Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva says he was mekel. He said before the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael, he learns from the pasuk that they were able to kill an animal without shchita. It would be a shchitas, what is it called? Shchitas nechira. That basar nechira, that if they would poke the animal, stab it to death, that was enough, and then they could eat it. It's still asa. Even menachai was asa. They had to kill it, but there was no need to do what we call a shchita. But when they came to Eretz Yisrael, the animals to be eaten required shchita. Like we said, even Rabbi Kiva agrees that by the Mishkan and in the Midbar, they had to do shchita. They had to do a technical shchita for kachim, but when they got to Eretz Yisrael, everything needed shchita, even just for eating. And that's what it says. Even after they left Eretz Yisrael, they still remain that they have to do a shchita. We keep a savar basa taiva it's a klal. Rekiva disagrees with Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel had said that the Yidden were not allowed to eat stam basa chulin with a shchita in the midbar. Rabbi Kiva disagrees. He says there was never such a thing. Shmuel savar basa nechir leishtri klal. Rabbi Shmuel, conversely, doesn't agree with the Rabbi Kiva's premise that in the midbar they were allowed to eat basa nechira, basa that hadn't undergone a shchita. The Torah often says, there's a whole Parshas Vayikra, which is in the Midbar, which talks about how they shechted the animals for the karbanis. El Kiva mai v'shachat. So Gemara kachim shiny. Kachim are different. Rabbi Kiva, I mentioned this before. I forgot that this was in the Gemara coming up. That Rabbi Kiva had never said that you don't need shchita. Even in the Midbar, you still needed shchita for kachim. The pasuk, that Rabbi Kiva had learned from, it says Hatzaynu baka yishchat lahem matzah lahem imes kol degei hayam yasav lahem umatzah lahem. The pasuk says that when the Yidden come into Eretz Yisrael, they're gonna be. It's not talking about when they come to Eretz Yisrael. It's talking about during the time of the Shlah, when the Yidden were complaining about the basar. And this is part of the discussion. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ban Shalom was saying they're going to have so much Shlah that they're going to not even be interested in meat from their cattle and from their sheep. But you see, it's talking about shchita. What's this reference to shchita in the midbar? So you're not going to let me violate. It should have said they just kill them. Why does it say shchita? So the Gemara says the word shchita means slaughtering. It doesn't inherently mean a kosher shchita with the chalaf and doing the two simanim. So you can call the nechira, the killing of them, was called shchita. Right? We know shchita is slaughtering. In English, it's the same thing. So shchita does not mean bedavka a kosher shchita. So when the Torah refers to them slaughtering cattle and sheep, it means without a shchita, without a kosher shchita. So bishmal mishmal hainu ditnan. We can understand what it learns it says in the Mishnah. Hashoichet v'nisnavla biyadei. Someone who tries to shecht and he makes a mistake, he presses down or he pauses and becomes an avela. The shechita is not a kosher avela. V'anoicher, someone who stabs the animal to kill it, v'ama'aker, or he rips out the simanim instead of slicing them. Pota milichsis. Although there's a din of kisei adam, when someone shechts a chaya, a non-domesticated animal, there's generally a mitzvah asay that you have to cover the dam. That's only if it has a kosher shchita. If it becomes an avela, there's no mitzvah of kisei adam. That's what the Mishnah says. In fact, the Gemara, Ela Bekiva Amai Pata Milichsis. According to Bekiva, why would we say that if you do a nechira on a chaya, there's no mitzvah of kisei adam. But during the time, there should have been a mitzvah of kisei adam on such an animal. During the time when the Yidden were in the midbar, according to Rabbi Kiva, they were allowed to do nechira. They didn't have to do shchita, so the animal is not a nevela. So why are we saying as a rule that there's no kisei adam for bas and nechira? That wouldn't hold true during the during the midbar. So the Mishnah is talking about the current halacha, and currently the halacha is that there's no way to shecht an animal without doing a proper shchita, and therefore the Mishnah says that you're not going to need kisei adam. Now we go asking a kasha on Bishmal. Bishmal Rabbi Kiva da Amar Basa Taivali, it's a klal. According to Rabbi Kiva, who says that there was never, unlike Rabbi Shmuel, who says that in the midbar the Yidden couldn't eat, couldn't shech just to eat. They had to bring a carbon. This is the pasuk after the Torah said what was interpreted to Rabbi Shmuel by Rabbi Shmuel as saying that the Yidden were not able to eat without a carbon. It says when they came to Eretz Yisrael, they could eat just the same way they eat the tzvi and the ayil. So too they could eat everything without bringing it as a carbon. So that makes sense according to Rabbi Kiva, because according to Rabbi Kiva there was no isser on eating meat that wasn't a carbon. So we can understand why the Torah would refer to eating a tzvi, a deer, or ayil, or a ram. Ayil is in this case is talking about, I think, a undomesticated, a wild ram. So saying you could eat just like you could eat those, you could eat any shechted animal. According to Rabbi Shmuel, that says that you can only bring kachrim in the midbar. There was no such thing as eating a tzvi, as eating a deer in the midbar, because you can't bring a deer as a carbon. So there was no deer being eaten. So how could you say kasher yoichel as tzvi? You couldn't eat the tzvi. So the Gemara says no, that's incorrect. Ki asur rachmana behema chazir la'akrava. Chayid l'chazir la'akrava le'asur rachmana. The Gemara says that although according to Rabbi Shmuel they could only eat with the carbon, that only applied to animals that were able to be bought as carbonis. That means, like we said, the reason was because they had the Mishkan right near them, so there was no reason not to bring it as a shlum. But those animals that are not eligible to be bought as a carbon, there was never an isser on them. Those, even according to Rabbi Shmuel, could have been eaten in the midbar. Boy, Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah asks a shaila, which it's interesting because it's not negei lamaisa that it should ask such a question. Ivrei basa nechira, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that he says, according to Rabbi Akiva, that says that when the Yidden were in the midbar, they did not have to shecht their basa. If you have meat, when the Yidden had meat that was killed in the Midbar, so they were allowed to eat it at the time. Shechnisu Yisraeli Mohen La'aretz, and the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael back when they completed their 40 years in the Midbar. They went to Eretz Yisrael. They still had a ice chest full of meat that hadn't been shechted. Mao. What's the din with that meat? Now, this is what I referred to yesterday. Amos. When are you asking this question? If you're talking about the first 7 years, when the Yidden were conquering Eretz Yisrael, right after they crossed over the Yarden. Now, at that time, Yidden were allowed to eat even non-kosher animals. That when they came in, they found that the houses of the Canaanim were full of all type of good things. Kisli the Chaziri basa. Kisli the Chaziri. It's talking about pork. It's talking about bacon. The Yidden were allowed to eat bacon during the 7 years that they found in the Canaanim's house. So basa nechira mibaya. If they're allowed to eat mamish treif, they certainly could eat basa that wasn't shechted properly, that had been kosher earlier. I'm just wondering, even though once we're talking about things that are not negei lamaisa, I wonder if this would have been mater even basa b'cholov, saying whatever you found by the Canaanim you could eat. Saying you could eat the chazir, could you eat the bacon cheeseburger? Like once you have the heter, you might as well chop around the whole thing. I asked this as a brain teaser by the Shabbos table, and no one had any. I never heard of this. I don't remember ever seeing this. It's mind blowing, right? The Yidden could go and eat bacon. They could have bacon. So if ever you get like a faken, one of these fake non-kosher meats, you ask the guy, "How do you know about it?" He says, "I remember from the kivush of Eretz Yisrael. That's when I tasted it." So tomorrow. So certainly we can't be questioning during that 7 years. Elamai must be after that time. Maybe it could be talking about those first 7 years. They only allowed the meat from Avdei Chavim. That was part of the bracha of Eretz Yisrael. When you're going to come in, you could use their food. Did hula ishtri, but there was no heter on the food of the Yidden themselves that they had brought in, and therefore it's not necessarily the case that it would be mutter to eat. It's like the Gemara Teku. It remains a question. So this is not really a machlokes. It seems to be saying this is a halacha that during those 7 years you could eat tarfas, but we don't have an answer according to Rabbi Shmuel of whether they were allowed to eat the leftover meat that hadn't been shechted during the midbar when they were allowed to eat meat without shechit. Amar Rabba, Shanisa, we learned in the Mishnah, Hakol Sheichten, Lo'ilim Sheichten. We said that Hakol Sheichten, which we said earlier, we had said that what it's coming to tell you, and then we said Lo'ilim Sheichten, and that's telling you a different thing. So now Gemara is going to say, B'chol Sheichten my mashnes. What are these things telling you? What is b'chol sheichtim? The last thing that we say, b'chol sheichtim, you could shecht with anything. If you're going to say that this third statement of the Mishnah is talking about shechting with a rock, or with a piece of glass, or with a piece of reed, which the Brisa had said it's kosher, then it should be similar to the first things. So we had said, the Gemara had said earlier, the first pshat, which he's going to disagree with. Rab's going to disagree with. Rab's going to disagree with. But we said before that Hakol Sheichtim tells you could even shecht you even have to shecht a oif. And the second was to tell you that, like we said before, the different pshatim to tell you that, according to Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, that you have to have a full shchita even when the Yidden left Eretz Yisrael, depending on each one what pshat it was. But now it's saying that the third shot is Bitsur Beschuchas. The third point that the Mishnah made was saying what kind of knife should be used. He's asking, it doesn't make sense. They're not all similar. According to the way we had said the first two things, that we're talking about a oif, and we're talking about a an animal after the Yidden left. So then why are we saying now how you shecht it? It's not, before we were talking about the things that you're shechting, which things need shchita, and now we're saying how you shecht it. Doesn't make sense to have them to have the subject of what the Mishnah is talking about. It says three phrases. It says, what is it? Hakol shechten, u'la'olam shechten, and then b'kol shechten. They should all be referring to the same thing. So Rava says a different shot than what we had said in the preceding couple of Latin Gemara. Hakol shechtim chada lasu yakusi, v'chada lasu Yisrael mumar. It says Hakol shechtim and bechol shechtim. It's coming to tell you both a kusi and a mumar that if they shecht, their shchita is ksher. And then it says la'olam shechtim bein biyoyim bein b'layla b'reisha gag bein b'reisha gag bein b'reisha svina. It says la'olam shechtim. That's telling you this. We had also brought this in a brisa before. You could do it both by night and by day. You could do it on the top of a gag, even though he pours the water off, and we're not concerned that it looks like he's pouring it off. He's pouring it into a kli, and it looks like he's saving it for Avodah Zarah, Shasfina, the same sort of thing. If he pours it into the ocean, we don't think that he's coming to be over the ocean. And then it says, so again, it's still talking about how you shecht, not what you're shechting. It's not talking about which animals are kosher l'shchita. It's talking about how you do the shchita, and all three are similar. So the Mishnah had continued. Chutz mi magal katzir v'hamagira. You could shecht with anything except for a magal katzir, which is a scythe used for harvesting that only has a blade with teeth. A blade with teeth is pasal l'shchita. V'hamagira is a saw, so obviously has many teeth, so that's pasal. Avodah Shmuel pagal v'shada pagam v'shada. He kept on making different types of flaws, different types of notches in a shchita knife, and sending it to the Rabbanon to determine whether it was kosher. And sholchulei k'magira shaninu, and they said back to him the rule that we learned that when it's similar to that of a saw, then it's going to be possible. So as the Gemara is going to soon explain, that there's all different kinds of different shaped notches. The typical notch of a saw, where you have a V-shaped notch, that's what passes. Other shaped notches don't necessarily pass. Ton Rabban. The word's going to explain. Sak and sheyesh b'pagimis harbe, a knife that has many different flaws or notches, tidin kemagira. It's treated like a saw, and it's going to be possible if you do a shkita with it. She'em ba'ala pagima achas. If it only has one single notch, oigeres psula misuchseches kshera. If it's something called oigeres, which is if it will oigeres to means oiger to igeres is to bundle something together. So if it catches something on its puzzle misuchseches, but if it sort of bumps over it, then it's kosher. What does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Igeres mishtei ruchais. Igeres means that there's a steep angle to this notch on both sides. So then it's definitely whatever. When you pass something over, let's say you pass the siman over, it's going to catch in it and it's going to rip it instead of slicing it. Mitzuchsechas meruch achas. But if it's only from one side, then it's going to be kosher. If it's only a sharp angle at one side, and then the other side is a gradual angle up, so the gradual angle up is not going to catch on it, it's just going to slice, then it could be kosher. Maishna mishtei ruchois. Why is it that from two sides it's going to be possible? He says, and one side not, because l'chayre the mursha kama machlish. The first, when you have two sides to this notch, so when you pass the knife over it, so only one side catches anyway. So the first side, when it catches, it weakens the skin of the animal. Or mursha basra baza. The second one will ruin it because it will then rip the simanim. So the first one softened the skin, and the second one rips the second side rips the siman. Baruch frektig mar baruch asachnami churba de sakina machlish. L'chayra, we know that you can cut the skin with the sharp knife. So why don't we say that the sharp knife first cuts it, and then when it hits that notch, that single side of the notch, that's what rips the simanim, and therefore it should be puzzle. And mursha baza. Zakamar the kamaresh de sakina. We're talking about where this notch, the single-sided notch, is all the way at the end of the sakin. So he first he goes past it. When he goes past it, the first thing it does, that notch, when it hits the animal, it cuts the skin, and then the rest of it is only the sharp knife that's cutting it. So there's no chash that the notch is what, or the sharp edge, the slope is what cut the siman or ripped the siman. But the Gemara asks, why don't we have a concern that you're going to go back and forth? So even though the what do you call it? The notch didn't cut all the way through it. First just went through the skin. But we know that you always go back and forth to cut through the simanim. Maybe the second siman, the end of the second siman will be ripped by when it goes back over that notch. We're talking about he just did one motion, he didn't do a back and forth motion. So therefore it only hit that notch one time. So I asked the Rav in my shul, where I davened Ma'ariv last night, I asked him about this, that we had said before, right, that you have to have back and forth, right? We talked about that knife that he threw against the wall, and it killed, it shechted the animal, and said it had to be talking about where it bounced back. So he said that whole thing was only, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if he's right. I don't know where he got it from. I'm going to try to look it up. He says that the whole din that you have to have back and forth is just by a shorter knife. Be'etzem is just, you just need, a normal knife needs to go back and forth in order to have enough length to reach the whole siman. But if you have a double length knife, then it doesn't have to go back and forth at all. So the whole Gemara before was just talking about, because we're talking about a normal sized knife. Amar Rava, Gimel Midas Besakin. There are three types of sakinim that have three different dinim. A geras lo yishchat. If the notch in the sakin gathers, it causes a ripping, you can't shecht with it. And if he did shecht with it, the shechita is possible. But if it only had a one side, a sharp edge on one, not a sharp edge, a sharp slope on one side, you're not supposed to cut with it. But if you do it, but the evidence good. If he goes, if the knife doesn't have a sharp slope like a notch in it, but rather gradually goes up and gradually goes down, that can use lechatchila. We said that Misuchseches, if it meaning that's the one-sided slope of the notch. It's possible, but you just said that it's kosher. It depends, like we said before, it depends on whether if you're going both ways, then we're chayshish that it's going to catch on the notch when you're cutting the simanim. But if it's at the end of the knife and you just use it at the beginning, then we assume it's only cutting the skin, it's not touching the simah. Amalei Rav Acha Breder Rav Avila Rav Ashi. Damya l'saso mai. What happens? Rashi says saso. It's the, like he says, the zokin hashibalim. It's like the bumps on a ear of grain. So it means that the knife doesn't have notches. It doesn't have abrupt flaws, but it has like where it goes up and down, smaller bumps. Amalei man yav lam bibsar v'achlin. And he said, "Give me some of that food and I'll eat it. I have no problems." Amar Chizda, minayin lebedika sakan min haTorah. Where do we see a pasuk that says that a sakan has to be examined before use for shchita? Shnema, shchatem bezeh v'achaltem. It says about Shol, Yom Shol psu ba'am v'matalhem, everyone bring and v'shchatem bezeh, and you should use this to shech them and eat them. Shol told them, use this to eat them. Shol was the zaken. So Vaistai Shol looked at the knife before he gave it to them to eat. Gemara says, what do you need a pasuk with Shol to tell you that you have to check the knife? We just gave a whole explanation that it's going to rip. If the knife is flawed, it's going to rip, and it's not going to make a good shchita. So that's why you have to examine. So Gemara l'chacham karminan. It's telling you the din, like we said before, that you have to have a chacham. The chacham shabir. As a matter of covet, he should be the one to check the knife. We just said it. Why are we saying it's a pasuk? If it's mishum kvoide shel chacham, what do we have to have this pasuk with Shol to tell you? So the reason is because of the covet of the chacham. We just brought this pasuk as a reminder, asmachta, so we'll remember the halakha. B'marova batki lo b'shimsha. In the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they would check the knives by the sun. They would hold it up to the sun and look for flaws. B'nardo, batkula b'maya. They would check it with water. Rashi says a couple shatim. The first pshat he says is you take the knife and you use it on the surface of the water. You drag it on the water, and if you see straight ripples, you know that there's no flaws in it. Rav Sheshes badik la b'reish lishne. Rav Sheshes would check it with the tip of his tongue. To feel with his tongue if there's any flaws. He would use a hair and see if the hair got caught in it. In Surah they would say, since the knife is being used to cut meat, you have to check it with meat, meaning with a person's fingernail or his tongue, something that's similar to what you're going to cut it with. Amar Papa, Tzircha Bedika, Abisra, you have to check it with like his tongue or on some part of his body, ba'atufra, and on his fingernail, which is similar to the bones or the simanim, the cartilage that he's going to cut. And they change. The Messiah says a slightly different lashon, but atlasa ruscha, it means on all three sides of the knife. The knife has the sharp edge and has the two sides of the knife. You also have to check to see if there's any notches in the sides of the knife, because those can also catch on the simanim. Amul Ravina Ravashi, Amalon, Rav Sama Breder Mishashi Mishimcha the Amrit Le Mishmei Rava. Shricha Bedika Abisra Va'atufra Va'atlasa Ruscha. He said that we said they're also the same thing that you have to have on all three sides, as well as on his tongue and on the fingernail. He said no, they didn't say they have to do on the sides of the knife. Some say that he says he agreed with him that you need all three, but he disagreed that he had said it over b'shem Rava. Ravinu Aracha Brei Rava have a Yasir Kamei de Ravashi. Listen for the Ravashi. Aisu Sakan leKamei de Ravashi leBatka. They brought a knife to Ravashi to check. Amalei Ravacha Brei Rava leBitka Batka Atufra Abisra Atlasa Ruscha. He said that he checked it on all three sides. Did you check? He said, tell him to check it, and he checked it on all three sides. Amalei Asher. He said you did the right thing. Rav Kahana said, Rav Yemer said that you don't need to do it on both sides. And well, he has a raya for this. Mili Amar of Zera Amar Shmuel. This is a Gemara we had a little bit earlier, back on Daf Ches, so about 10 days ago. Liben saken v'shachad ba, if you heated up a knife that it became hot enough to burn, and you used it for shchita, shchita is kshera. The shchita is a kshera. Shchiruda kaidim livuna. If the burning happened first, then the burning would have made the animal a treifa before the shchita. But he says that the knife slices the simanim before the heat of the knife burns the simanim. The Kashlan, we asked them, they don't get studied. We asked, what about the sides of the knife that they burn as it's passing through the simanim? So they should apply even before the sakin completes the slice, the sharp edge. We said that the sides of the knife don't touch the sides of the basar as he's cutting the simanim because it splits open and the sides of the knife are not in contact with the basar to burn it. So he says, so similarly over here, he's saying you have to check the sides of the knife. Rav Yemer said it's not necessary because the sides of the knife don't touch the beis hashchita; they're not going to catch in it. Amar Rav Huna bar Rav Katina Amar Rav Shimon Lakish Sholish Pegimasein. There are three pegimas. There are three examples of things that get a flaw in it. They're all going to have the same midah. They're going to have the same measurement of when the pagam is going to pass it. Pegimas etzem Pesach. The din is you're not allowed to break a bone on Pesach, and if it has a notch of this size that the Gemara is we're going to describe, it's going to passel. Begimas oize in bebechar, a mum in a bechar, if it has in its ear a little notch, that will make it a balmum, and it will be able to be eaten. It doesn't have to be eaten be brought as a carbon. And begimas in bekachim and stam to bring an animal. Not necessarily a bachar, any animal as a kachim. When you have a mum, it's going to, if it's one of these notches, it's something in the eye or the ear or the nostril that makes it a balmum, it's going to be that same shear. Chizda Amar Af Begim Sakin. Chizda added to this list, in addition to these three, also the flaw of a knife will be the same thing. And the other one said, no, we're not talking about the knife, we're only talking about things that are relevant to kachim, and therefore we didn't include that. And all of them, their shear of what's considered a pagam is the same as what would be considered a pagam. The mizbech was made out of stones. Those stones had to be shleimim. They couldn't have any flaws in them. So whatever the shear of the mizbech was, that's what's going to be the shear in the breaking of a bone on Pesach, and for mum in an animal that's brought as a carbon. The kam begim is on mizbeach. We keep pushing this down the road, so finally we have to come to an actual shear. How much is the begam in the mizbeach? Kadesha tach gabotzi poirin, enough that a fingernail would be caught in it, which is also the shear that we use. One of the shearim, at least, that we use for a shchita. Meisvei. Correct the Gemara, you're saying it's like a fingernail. I used to come up begim is hamizbech. How much is the pagam in the mizbech that passes there? Rav Shimon Yochai Omer tefach. Shimon Yochai says a tefach. Rav Shimon Yaakov Omer kazayis. He says the size of a. One says the size of a fist. The other one says the size of a kazayis, an olive. Both of these are much bigger than the amount that would be caught by a fingernail. So Gemara like kasha haba sida haba avna. When we're talking about the stones that make up the mizbech, it has to be smooth up to the amount that you can't even catch a fingernail in it. But the cedar, the cement that was used to attach it together, that was not that would wear down, and it would have cracks in it, and those could have relatively large cracks without passing. Avramuna, Hai tevcha deloy sar sakina kami chacham, any butcher, sheikhet, that doesn't bring his sakin in front of a chacham to check, we put him in chayrim, we suspend him, or however long it is. I don't know how long a shamtina and a chayrim is, maybe a week or a month, and then he goes back afterwards, he goes back to work. We kick him out of his job, we make him lose his job altogether, and we say whatever he shechted is treifa. V'loy pligi. Why do we have two separate dinim? Kambish and nimtza sakina yafa. Kambish aloi nimtza sakina yafa. We're talking about with someone who didn't bring his knife to be checked. So if we then later check it and we find that it was taka no good, then we kick him out permanently. But if we find his knife was good, then he just wasn't mechabed the chacham properly, so he just gets put into chayrim for a short time and then he goes back. Mimas mislei beparta. Then, if we find that there's a problem with his knife, so then what does it mean? Mimas masle beparsa. Rashi says the parsa parash, parsa tagum shel parash. I guess that means we what does it mean? Yeah, parsa. Where is it? I'm sorry, I lost my place over here. Parsa parash, parsa tagum shel parash. So you foul his meat. Instead of just saying that it's treifa, you make it that it's not able to be eaten. You make it unable to be eaten by smearing it with something disgusting, so that even it can't be sold at all. So we want him not just to lose his job, we don't want him to be nena from causing Yidden to eat tafas. There was a certain butcher that didn't bring his knife to Rav Bachina, was the Rav of the Shtat. Shamte, he put him in Chayim, Va'arei, and he kicked him out. Va'achos abisrei detarfahi, and he said that his basar is treifas. Eklu Marzutra Ravashi legabe, when Rav Marzutra and Ravashi came to Rav Chinina, and he asked them, Amalahu la ya'anu rabba b'milsa detolu beitafli. He said, check into this. I put him in Chayim and I kicked him out, but I feel bad because he has young children and he's going to lose his parnasa and they're gonna starve. Rav Ashi checked the knife and he found it was good and he said it's kosher. And he said that you could eat from his food. He put him back into his position. He gave him his parnasa back. Amalei Marzutra said to Rav Ashi, how could you overturn Rav Chinina had kicked him out of his job, and you now are going and reinstating him? He said, no, he himself, Rav Chinina, told me to check into it. So I checked into it, and I was able to put him back. Now, it sounds very strange. Why was Rav Chinina doing all this? But we know that there is such a concept that a Rav has to be makbid on his kavod, right? That it's a halacha that you have to bring it to the Rav. So he has to do what he has to do in order to instill fear. He got someone else to come and be mevatel it because he didn't really want to hurt him, but he felt he had to keep it, he had to have the deterrence factor that they don't know that they're going to lose their jobs if they don't check it by him. Amar Rav bar Huna. Shein tlusha v'tzipayrin tlusha mutar lishchat. You can use an unattached tooth and an unattached nail to do shchita. L'chatchila. Our Mishnah, we said that you can't use a scythe, a commercial scythe, or a saw, or teeth, or nails, because the chaykin, instead of slicing, they rip the simanim out. So the teeth we could talk about, when we say it's possible, it's when there's more than one tooth. But if it's one tooth and you sharpen it, there's no problem. That which you said you can't use a nail, that's talking about when it's still attached, let's say to an animal's a claw that's attached to the animal. Like we said before, there's a problem with chuberes. But if it's unattached, it's good. Now, I always say Mishain Choinkin. Choinkin is not exactly the same thing. So the Choinkin goes on the other three. It's not going on the Tzipayim. Okay, Yashikayach will stop over here.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Good day, everyone.